For decades, Celine Dion was more than a singer. She was a force of nature, a voice so powerful, so pure, and so emotionally overwhelming that people across the world could recognize her after just one note. She did not simply perform songs. She made people remember where they were when they first heard them. She made heartbreak sound beautiful. She made love sound eternal. And for millions of fans, Celine Dion's voice became the soundtrack to their own lives. But behind the standing ovations, the glittering gowns, the sold-out arenas, and the timeless ballads, there was a woman carrying far more pain than most people ever realized. At 58, Celine Dion's life is no longer just the story of fame, success, and record-breaking music. It has become a story of survival. A story about a woman who once seemed unstoppable, now facing a battle that took her away from the one place she always belonged, the stage. And when fans finally saw what she had been going through, many were left heartbroken. For years, Celine made everything look effortless. Her voice could rise with impossible strength, then soften into a whisper that felt like it was meant for only one person in the room. She could command a stadium with confidence, yet still make every listener feel as if she was singing directly to them. From The Power of Love to Because You Loved Me, from It's All Coming Back to Me Now to the unforgettable My Heart Will Go On, Celine Dion built a career on emotion. She did not hide from pain. She turned it into music. But perhaps that is why her own pain was so difficult for fans to see. Celine was born in Charlemagne, Quebec, the youngest of 14 children. Her family did not have much money, but they had music. In the Dion home, music was not a hobby. It was part of daily life. Her parents ran a small piano bar, and from the time she was a child, Celine was surrounded by songs, voices, and dreams bigger than the town she came from. Even as a little girl, there was something different about her. She did not sing like someone trying to impress people. She sang like someone who had no choice but to release what was inside her. Her family knew it. Audiences knew it. And eventually, one man knew it too, René Angélil. René would become her manager, her mentor, and later, the love of her life. When he first heard her voice, he was so moved that he reportedly believed he had found something extraordinary. And he was right. Under his guidance, Celine's career began to rise. First in French-speaking Canada, then across Europe, then finally across the entire world. But success did not come overnight. Celine had to transform herself from a young girl with a remarkable voice into an international superstar. She learned English. She studied performance. She endured criticism, pressure, and the expectations that come with being called a once-in-a-generation talent. And through it all, she kept singing. By the 1990s, Celine Dion was everywhere. Her voice filled radios, movie soundtracks, award shows, and arenas. She became one of the best-selling artists in history. Her performances were dramatic, elegant, and technically breathtaking. She could hold a note longer than seemed humanly possible. She could make audiences cry without moving from the microphone. Then came My Heart Will Go On. When Titanic became a global phenomenon, Celine's voice became tied forever to one of the most emotional films ever made. The song was not just a hit. It became a cultural moment. Weddings, funerals, school dances, talent shows, radio stations, television specials. Everywhere you went, Celine's voice followed. To the world, she had reached the top. But life at the top was never as simple as it looked. Behind the fame was sacrifice. Behind the applause were long hours, exhaustion, and the pressure to deliver perfection every single night. Celine was not just a celebrity. She was a brand, a business, a global expectation. People came to her shows expecting to hear the impossible. And somehow, night after night, she gave it to them. For a long time, it seemed like nothing could stop her. Then life began taking pieces from her. In 2016, Celine lost René, the man who had shaped her career and shared her life for decades. His death devastated her. He had been there from the beginning, long before the world knew her name. He had believed in her when she was still a child with a dream. He had stood beside her as she became an icon. And when he was gone, Celine had to continue not only as an artist, but as a mother, a widow, and a woman trying to find herself without the person who had been beside her for most of her journey. Fans watched her grieve with dignity. They watched her return to the stage with tears in her eyes and strength in her voice. Many believed that if anyone could survive such a loss, it was Celine Dion. But years later, another battle came, one that attacked the very thing she was most famous for. Celine began experiencing serious health problems. At first, fans only knew that shows were being delayed or canceled. There were statements, apologies, and promises that she was doing her best. But the full truth was far more painful. Celine was dealing with a rare neurological condition known as stiff person syndrome, a disorder that can cause intense muscle spasms and affect movement, daily life, and even the ability to sing. For a singer like Celine Dion, this was not just a medical diagnosis. It was a nightmare. Imagine building your entire life around your voice, only to wake up one day and realize your own body may no longer let you use it the same way. Imagine hearing the cheers of fans in your memory, seeing the lights of the stage in your mind, but not knowing if you will ever be able to stand there again. Imagine wanting to sing, needing to sing, but being trapped inside a body that refuses to cooperate. That is the heartbreak fans did not see at first. Celine did not disappear because she stopped caring. She stepped away because she was fighting a battle most people could not understand. And for someone who had given her entire life to the public, admitting that kind of vulnerability was not easy. But when the truth finally came out, it changed the way people saw her. Celine Dion was no longer just the legendary diva with a golden voice. She was a woman in pain, a mother trying to stay strong, an artist terrified of losing her gift, a fighter facing an enemy she could not defeat with talent, discipline, or applause. And still, somehow, she refused to give up. Because Celine Dion's story has never only been about music. It has always been about emotion, endurance, and the courage to keep going when life takes away the things you love most. But what happened next would reveal just how painful her private battle had truly become. For most people, losing control of the body is frightening. But for Celine Dion, it was something even deeper. Her body was not just a body. It was her instrument. Every breath, every muscle, every tiny movement of her throat and chest had helped create the sound that made her famous around the world. Singing was not only her profession. It was how she expressed love, grief, gratitude, and pain. So when that instrument began to betray her, the fear was almost impossible to describe. Celine had spent her entire life training herself to be precise. She knew how to protect her voice. She knew how to prepare for performances. She understood discipline better than almost anyone. Her career was built not only on talent, but on control. Control of breath, control of pitch, control of emotion, control of the stage. But stiff person syndrome was different. This was not something she could simply rehearse through. It was not a bad day, a tired voice, or a temporary injury. It was unpredictable. It could affect her movement, her muscles, and her ability to perform the way fans expected. For someone who had always given everything to her audience, the idea of standing on stage and not being able to deliver was devastating. That was one of the reasons her cancellations hurt so much. Celine Dion was never known as an artist who casually walked away from her fans. She respected the stage too much. She respected her audience too much. When people bought tickets to see her, they were not just buying a concert. They were buying a memory. Many had waited years to hear her sing live. Some had saved money, traveled long distances, and planned special moments around her shows. Celine knew that. And that made every cancellation feel personal to her. She apologized again and again, not because she had done something wrong, but because disappointing her fans broke her heart. She wanted to be there. She wanted to stand under the lights, hear the orchestra begin, and feel the crowd rise before the first note. She wanted to do what she had always done, give people everything she had. But for the first time in her life, wanting it was not enough. That is what made this chapter so painful. Celine had survived grief. She had survived pressure. She had survived decades in an industry that can build people up and tear them apart. But this illness forced her into a kind of silence she never chose. And silence, for Celine Dion, was almost unbearable. For fans, it was strange to watch. One moment, she had been a permanent figure in entertainment. Elegant, powerful, emotional, always present. The next, she seemed to vanish from public life. No grand tours, no regular performances, no familiar wave from the stage. Just occasional updates, each one reminding the world that behind the legend was a woman still trying to recover. But the more people learned, the more heartbreaking the story became. Because Celine was not simply resting in luxury, far away from the world. She was fighting. She was working with doctors. She was trying to understand her condition. She was pushing herself carefully, hoping that one day she could return. She was doing the painful, private work that no audience sees. There are no standing ovations in a therapy room. There are no flashing lights when a person wakes up and has to face another difficult day. There is no applause for the quiet effort it takes to keep believing when the future is uncertain. And yet, that is where Celine's true strength began to show. For most of her career, people admired her because of her voice. But during this battle, many began to admire her for something else, her honesty. She did not pretend that everything was easy. She did not hide the seriousness of what she was facing forever. When she finally opened up, fans saw a different kind of courage. Not the courage of a superstar walking onto a stage, but the courage of a woman admitting she was scared, hurt, and still trying. That honesty made her more human than ever. Celine Dion had always seemed larger than life. Her voice was so powerful that it almost felt unreal. Her success was so massive that she seemed untouchable. But illness has a way of reminding the world that even icons are fragile. Even legends wake up afraid. Even the strongest people sometimes have to ask whether life will ever feel normal again. For Celine, the question was not only whether she could return to performing. The question was whether she could return to herself. Because when the stage has been your home since childhood, being away from it can feel like losing a piece of your identity. Celine was not someone who discovered music after fame. Music had been with her before the money, before the awards, before the global recognition. It was there in her family home in Quebec. It was there when she was a shy little girl with a voice too big for her small town. It was there before the world knew her face. So when illness threatened that connection, it was not just a career crisis. It was a spiritual one. Still, even in the middle of pain, Celine held on to hope. She spoke about wanting to return. She trained. She stayed close to her children. She leaned on the love of fans who had never forgotten her. And slowly, the world began to understand that this was not a story about defeat. It was a story about a woman refusing to let her illness write the final note. But the most emotional moment was still ahead. Because when Celine finally allowed cameras to capture the reality of her condition, the world saw something it had never seen before. Not the perfect diva, not the polished performer, but the raw, painful truth of a legend fighting to survive behind closed doors. When Celine Dion allowed the world to see her struggle, it was not for sympathy. It was not to create a spectacle. It was not to remind people that she was famous. It was something much deeper than that. She wanted people to understand the truth, not the glamorous version, not the edited version, but the painful reality of what her life had become. For years, fans had known Celine as the woman who could stand in front of thousands and make every person in the room feel something. She was graceful, funny, emotional, and almost superhuman when she sang. But behind closed doors, the battle was far less polished. There were difficult days, frightening symptoms, and moments when her own body seemed to turn against her without warning. That was what made the footage so devastating. People were used to seeing Celine in sparkling gowns, under perfect lighting, with an orchestra behind her and applause surrounding her. They were not used to seeing her vulnerable. They were not used to seeing the effort behind a single movement, the frustration behind a single note, or the fear behind her eyes when her body would not respond the way she needed it to. And perhaps that is why so many fans cried. Because for the first time, the world was not watching Celine Dion the superstar. They were watching Celine Dion, the human being. The woman who had given millions of people comfort through music now needed comfort herself. The woman whose voice had carried others through heartbreak was now fighting through her own. The woman who had spent her life giving strength to audiences was now trying to find enough strength for herself. It was painful because it felt unfair. Celine had already endured so much. She had lost René, the man who had believed in her before almost anyone else did. She had raised children while carrying grief that never truly disappears. She had spent decades giving everything to her career, often sacrificing privacy, rest, and normal life. And just when it seemed she had entered a new chapter, a chapter where she could define herself beyond loss, her health became the next mountain she had to climb. For many fans, the hardest part was realizing that Celine was not only fighting pain, she was fighting uncertainty. Pain is terrible, but uncertainty can be even crueler. Pain tells you what hurts. Uncertainty refuses to tell you when it will end. It asks the same questions every morning. Will today be better? Will the symptoms return? Will the voice come back? Will the stage ever feel possible again? For an artist like Celine, those questions were heavy. The stage had never been just a workplace for her. It was where she felt most alive. It was where she could speak without explaining. Every song became a conversation with the audience. Every performance became a way of saying, I am still here. So when illness took her away from that place, it created a silence that no award, no memory, and no past success could fill. And yet, even in that silence, Celine's spirit remained. She still laughed. She still showed warmth. She still spoke with love about her fans. She still held onto the dream of returning, not because she needed more fame, but because singing had always been part of who she was. Fame can fade, charts can change, trends can disappear. But when music lives inside someone that deeply, it does not simply leave. That is what made her fight so powerful. Celine was not trying to prove that she was still a star. She was trying to reclaim a part of herself that illness had threatened to steal. Every exercise, every treatment, every attempt to sing again was not just preparation for a show. It was an act of defiance. It was her way of telling the disease that it could slow her down, but could not erase the woman she had spent a lifetime becoming. And the world responded with love. Fans from every country sent messages, prayers, memories, and encouragement. They reminded her that she did not need to hit every note perfectly to be loved. She did not need to perform every night to be remembered. She did not need to be flawless to remain Celine Dion. To them, she had already given enough music for several lifetimes. But that is the thing about artists like Celine. They do not measure their lives by what they have already given. They measure them by what they still hope to give. Deep inside, Celine still wanted to sing. She still wanted to feel that connection. She still wanted to walk back onto a stage, look out into the crowd, and know that the long, painful road had not been for nothing. And that dream became the emotional center of her journey. Because this was no longer just a comeback story. It was a question of identity. Who is Celine Dion without the stage? Who is she if the voice that defined her becomes uncertain? Who is she when the world stops hearing the perfect notes and starts seeing the private pain? The answer was heartbreaking, but also beautiful. She was still Celine. Not because she could sing higher than anyone else. Not because she had sold millions of records. Not because she had won awards or filled arenas. She was still Celine because of her heart, her resilience, and her refusal to disappear quietly into suffering. But as the world watched her fight, one question remained impossible to ignore. Could Celine Dion ever truly come back? Could Celine Dion ever truly come back? That was the question fans kept asking, but it was also the question Celine herself had to face every single day. Not in front of cameras, not beneath stage lights, not with a microphone in her hand, but in the quiet moments when the applause was gone and all that remained was the reality of her condition. For a performer, a comeback is usually about timing, rehearsals, promotion, and confidence. But for Celine, it was about something far more fragile. It was about whether her body would allow her to do what her soul was still desperate to do. She could not simply announce a return and force it into existence. She had to listen to doctors. She had to listen to her body. And perhaps hardest of all, she had to accept that healing does not follow the schedule of a tour calendar. That kind of patience was not easy for someone like Celine. All her life, she had worked. She had practiced. She had pushed through exhaustion, grief, pressure, and fear. Discipline had carried her from a small town in Quebec to the biggest stages in the world. But this time, discipline alone was not enough. No amount of ambition could guarantee that the spasms would stop. No amount of love from fans could promise that her voice would return exactly as it once was. And that was the part that made her story so emotional. Celine was not fighting for fame. She already had that. She was not fighting for money. She had built a legendary career. She was not fighting to prove that she belonged among the greatest singers of all time. That had been proven decades ago. She was fighting for the right to feel like herself again. For many people, identity is built around family, work, memories, and dreams. For Celine Dion, music was woven through all of it. It was there in her childhood. It was there in her love story with René. It was there in her motherhood, her grief, her triumphs, and her losses. Her voice had carried her through every chapter of her life. So when illness threatened that voice, it did not just threaten her career. It threatened the language through which she understood the world. That is why her struggle reached so many people. Even fans who had never faced her exact condition understood the fear of losing something essential. The athlete who can no longer move the same way. The artist whose hands begin to fail. The parent who can no longer do the things they once did with ease. The worker whose health suddenly changes the future they had planned. Celine's story became universal because it was not only about a superstar losing the stage. It was about a human being facing the terrifying possibility that life may never return to what it was. But Celine Dion has never been someone who lets pain have a final word. Even in her most difficult moments, she kept showing signs of hope. Not loud, dramatic hope, but quiet hope. The kind that lives in small steps. A day of training. A moment of progress. A note that feels stronger than it did before. A smile shared with her children. A message to fans. A reminder that she was still here, still fighting, still believing that tomorrow could be different from yesterday. That is what made her journey so powerful. It was not perfect. It was not easy. It was not the kind of comeback that happens overnight with a dramatic announcement and a flawless performance. It was slower than that. More painful than that. More honest than that. And maybe that honesty is exactly why fans loved her even more. For decades, Celine had been admired for sounding perfect. Now, she was being admired for being real. She showed that strength is not always about standing tall in front of thousands of people. Sometimes strength is admitting that you are afraid. Sometimes it is canceling a show because your body cannot continue. Sometimes it is crying, resting, trying again, and refusing to let shame silence you. The world had heard Celine Dion hit impossible notes. Now, the world was watching her survive impossible days. And through it all, her legacy only grew stronger. Because legacy is not only built from awards, album sales, and sold-out arenas. It is built from the way a person responds when everything becomes uncertain. It is built from the courage to be vulnerable. It is built from the love that remains when the performance stops. Celine's fans did not walk away when she could no longer tour. They waited. They listened. They supported her not because she owed them another song, but because she had already given them pieces of herself for decades. And now, in her hardest chapter, they wanted to give something back. They wanted her to know that she was not forgotten. They wanted her to know that her voice still mattered, even in silence. They wanted her to know that Celine Dion was not loved only for what she could perform, but for who she had always been. Still, the dream of returning never disappeared. Somewhere beneath the pain, beneath the fear, beneath the medical appointments and difficult days, there was still a woman who imagined the lights coming up again. There was still a singer who wanted to hear the first notes of the music begin. There was still an artist who wanted to step forward, take a breath, and prove that even after everything, the story was not over. And if that moment came, it would not just be another concert. It would be a resurrection. And if that moment came, it would not just be another concert. It would be a resurrection. For Celine Dion, walking back onto a stage would mean more than returning to work. It would mean stepping back into the place where her soul had always felt most alive. It would mean looking out at thousands of faces and knowing that the years of silence, pain, fear, and uncertainty had not defeated her. It would mean proving to herself, more than to anyone else, that the illness had changed her life, but it had not stolen her spirit. Fans understood this. That is why every small sign of hope felt enormous. A public appearance became more than a public appearance. A smile became more than a smile. A few words to fans became a message that she was still fighting. Every time Celine was seen looking stronger, walking with purpose, or speaking about the future, people around the world felt a flicker of hope. Not because they expected her to be the same woman she was 20 years ago, but because they wanted her to have the chance to feel whole again. That is the difference between admiration and love. People admired Celine Dion for her voice, but they loved her for the way she made them feel. She had been present in their weddings, their heartbreaks, their childhood memories, their lonely nights, and their moments of celebration. Her songs had become part of people's lives in ways she could never fully know. So when she suffered, it felt personal to millions. They were not simply waiting for a performance. They were waiting for a woman they cared about to find peace. But peace is complicated when the world remembers you at your strongest. Celine had spent decades being introduced as one of the greatest vocalists of all time. That kind of title is an honor, but it can also become a burden. When people expect perfection, returning imperfectly can feel terrifying. What if the voice is different? What if the body does not cooperate? What if the fans hear the struggle behind the note? Those fears were real. But maybe the truth is this: Celine Dion no longer has to prove she can be perfect. She already gave the world perfection. She gave the world power ballads that shook arenas. She gave performances that left people breathless. She gave songs that survived generations. She gave her youth, her strength, her discipline, and her heart to music. If she returns now, she does not return as someone trying to earn her place. She returns as someone who has already earned it 1,000 times over. And that is what makes this chapter so emotional. The young Celine had to fight to be seen. The global superstar had to fight to stay on top. The grieving widow had to fight to keep going after losing René. But the Celine of today is fighting a different battle. She is fighting to live with uncertainty. She is fighting to accept a body that may not always obey her. She is fighting to hold onto hope without pretending the pain is gone. That kind of fight is quiet, but it is heroic. It does not always look dramatic from the outside. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like rest. Sometimes it looks like canceling plans, stepping back, and choosing health over applause. But for someone who has spent her life giving everything to others, choosing herself may be one of the bravest things Celine has ever done. Still, the stage continues to call her. There's something almost poetic about that. The same stage that once demanded so much from her is also the place she longs to return to. The same spotlight that once came with pressure now represents healing. The same audience that once expected flawless vocals now wants something much simpler: to see her standing there, alive, present, and unbroken. Because if Celine Dion sings again, even one song, even one imperfect note, it will carry the weight of everything she has survived. It will not just be a song. It will be a message. A message to her illness. A message to her children. A message to René's memory. A message to every fan who waited. A message to anyone who has ever felt betrayed by their own body, robbed by fate, or silenced by pain. The message would be simple, but powerful. I'm still here. And that is why Celine Dion's story at 58 is so heartbreaking, yet so inspiring. It is not the story of a fallen star fading into darkness. It is the story of a woman standing in the middle of darkness, searching for the light she once gave so freely to everyone else. And maybe after all these years, the world is finally learning something important about her. Celine Dion's greatest performance may not be the song she sang at the height of her fame. It may be the strength she is showing now, when the music almost stopped. It may be the strength she is showing now, when the music almost stopped. Because when a voice like Celine Dion's grows quiet, the silence is not empty. It is filled with memories. It is filled with every note she ever sang, every audience she ever moved, every person who found comfort in her music when they had nowhere else to turn. Her silence does not erase her legacy. In many ways, it makes people understand that legacy even more deeply. For years, fans heard the voice. Now, they see the woman behind it. They see the child from Quebec who grew up in a crowded home full of music and dreams. They see the young artist who trusted René Angélil when the world had not yet learned her name. They see the woman who crossed languages, borders, and generations to become one of the most beloved singers on earth. They see the wife who lost her partner, the mother who had to stay strong, and the performer who had to keep walking onto the stage even when her heart was broken. And now, they see the fighter. That is why Celine's story has become bigger than celebrity news. It touches something personal in people. Everyone knows what it means to lose control of something. Everyone knows what it means to face a future that suddenly looks different from the one they imagined. Everyone knows what it feels like to ask, "Why me?" even when there is no answer. Celine's illness may be rare, but the emotions surrounding it are universal. Fear, grief, frustration, hope, courage. Those are things everyone understands. And maybe that is why her vulnerability has connected with people so powerfully. For most of her career, Celine stood before the world as a symbol of excellence. She was the singer other singers admired. She was the voice that could fill any room, any arena, any soundtrack, any moment. But today, she represents something different. She represents the painful truth that even the strongest people can be brought to their knees. But she also represents the choice to rise again. Not all at once, not perfectly, not without tears, but little by little. That is the kind of strength that does not always make headlines. It does not come with fireworks or dramatic music. It happens quietly, in private rooms, on difficult mornings, during small victories that no one else sees. It happens when a person decides to try again after a day that nearly broke them. It happens when hope feels unreasonable, but they hold on to it anyway. For Celine, every step forward matters. Every moment of progress carries meaning. Every attempt to use her voice again is not just practice. It is a reminder that she is still connected to the gift that changed her life. Even if the voice is different, even if the path is uncertain, the love behind it remains the same. And that may be what fans need to understand most. They do not need the old Celine back exactly as she was. They do not need her to recreate the past. They do not need her to prove she can still hit every note with the same force that once shook arenas. The Celine they love is not only a voice. She is a presence. She is a story. She is a reminder that beauty can survive pain. If she returns, it will not be about perfection. It will be about presence. It will be about seeing her stand before the world again and knowing what it cost her to get there. It will be about the breath before the first note, the silence before the music begins, and the moment when fans realize they are not just watching a concert. They are witnessing survival. That is why the emotional weight of her possible return is so heavy. A younger artist returning to the stage might be seen as exciting. A superstar returning after a break might be seen as entertainment. But Celine Dion returning after this battle would mean something else entirely. It would feel like a promise kept. A promise to herself. A promise to her children. A promise to the fans who waited with patience and love. And perhaps, in some quiet way, a promise to René. Because René was part of everything. He was there when the dream began. He guided her through the early years. He believed in the little girl with the extraordinary voice before the world ever applauded her. His absence still echoes through her story, especially now. In moments of fear, in moments of uncertainty, fans can only imagine how much she must miss the man who once helped her face every challenge. But Celine has continued. Not because it was easy, not because grief disappeared, not because illness became simple. She continued because that is what she has always done. She has always turned pain into something meaningful. She has always carried heartbreak with grace. She has always found a way to keep love at the center of her story. And that is why people still believe in her. Even now, after canceled shows, difficult updates, and heartbreaking revelations, there is still hope around Celine Dion. Not the naive kind of hope that ignores reality, but the deeper kind, the kind that understands how hard the road is and still believes there may be light ahead. Because Celine Dion's story is not over. The final chapter has not been written. And if the world has learned anything from her, it is this. When Celine Dion sings, she does not just use her voice. She uses her whole heart. And hearts like hers do not go silent forever.